The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning metal. Daniel Carter ran through the ruins of the battlefield, his breath coming in sharp gasps. His body ached, his side burned where a plasma shot had grazed him, and his strength was fading fast. He had lost his weapon, lost his team, and now he was alone on an alien planet with nowhere to hide. Behind him, alien warriors with dark exoskeleton armor moved in formation, their sharp, curved blades reflecting the eerie blue glow of the sky. They weren't in a hurry. They knew their prey was wounded. They wanted to drag out the hunt. Daniel stumbled over the uneven ground, crashing against the remains of a broken transport. His vision blurred for a moment as pain flared through his leg. His mind screamed for him to move, but his body refused. A shadow fell over him. One of the alien warriors stood above him, its four glowing eyes studying him like a predator sizing up its kill. It raised its blade, ready to deliver the final strike. And then everything stopped. A powerful voice echoed across the battlefield, filled with command and authority. Enough. The warrior hesitated, its blade pausing inches from Daniel's throat. The others turned, stepping back in unison. Daniel forced himself to look up. She stood at the top of the battlefield like a vision from a dream. Queen Zorelia, ruler of the Xelari Empire. Her presence was overwhelming. Her midnight blue armor shimmered, lined with golden symbols that marked her status. Her sharp, regal features were framed by long silver-white hair, and her piercing violet eyes locked onto Daniel with an expression that was both unreadable and intense. The warriors bowed immediately, pressing their fists to their chests in salute. Daniel, still gasping for breath, tried to push himself up but failed. Zorelia walked toward him, her gaze never leaving his face. "You are the last survivor," she said. Her voice was smooth, almost calm. A human, stranded and helpless. Daniel clenched his jaw. He knew he was at her mercy. If she wanted him dead, there was nothing he could do to stop her. She knelt before him, reaching out. Instinctively, he flinched, but she only placed a hand over his wound. A warm energy surged through him, and the pain in his side dulled. "Why? Why are you helping me?" Daniel rasped. Zorelia's lips curved slightly. "Because I have a proposal for you, human." He narrowed his eyes. "What kind of proposal?" She leaned in just a little, her violet gaze never wavering. "I will spare your life," she said. "I will heal you, protect you from my enemies, and ensure you live." Daniel exhaled in relief, but immediately knew there was a catch. He had seen enough war to know nothing came without a price. "But," he asked, his voice hoarse. Zorelia tilted her head. "But, in return, you will become my husband." For a moment, Daniel thought he had misheard her. His brain struggled to process the words. "Wait. What?" Murmurs rippled through the surrounding warriors, but none of them dared to speak out loud. Zorelia's expression remained calm, but there was a challenge in her gaze. "My kingdom follows ancient laws," she explained. "A royal spouse is protected by sacred tradition. No one may harm you, challenge you, or remove you if you are bound to me." Daniel stared at her. He barely understood their customs, but he knew one thing for sure. This was not a simple offer. "Why me?" he asked, struggling to sit up. "You could have anyone from your kind." The queen's gaze darkened slightly. "Because no Xelari would ever dare to challenge me," she said. "They see me as untouchable. But you are an outsider, a warrior who survived against the odds." Daniel swallowed hard. The weight of her words settled on him. This wasn't just about protection. She was making a political move. He looked at the warriors surrounding them. Some of them glared at him, clearly disgusted by the idea. Others looked indifferent. This wasn't just about saving his life. If he accepted, he would be tied to the most powerful woman in the empire. And if he refused, Daniel looked down at his wound. Without her help, he wouldn't last much longer. If he refused, they would kill him here and now. His choices were clear. Live as the Queen's husband, or die as a nameless soldier in the dirt. His fists clenched. He had never imagined his life would take such a strange turn. Daniel exhaled sharply, then met Zarelia's eyes. "Fine," he said. "I'll do it." The Queen's lips curved into the slightest smile, a look of satisfaction. The warriors around them stiffened, some in shock, others in barely hidden anger. "Good," Zarelia said, standing up. She reached down, offering her hand. "Then rise, husband." With no other choice, Daniel took her hand. As she pulled him to his feet, he realized something deep in his gut. This was only the beginning. Daniel Carter had expected many things in his life. Being stranded on an alien planet, that was possible. Fighting against towering alien warriors, that was part of the job. But becoming the husband of an alien queen, that was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He followed Queen Zarelia through the towering stone halls of her palace, his mind still struggling to process what had just happened. The palace was unlike anything he had seen before. Massive walls carved from black stone, glowing symbols lining the corridors, and alien guards stationed at every turn. Zarelia walked ahead of him with perfect confidence, her violet eyes focused forward. Despite her graceful steps, there was no mistaking the power she carried. She ruled with strength, and her people feared and respected her. Daniel wasn't sure which one he should feel. He could hear whispers from the warriors and nobles they passed. Some of them glared at him, their expressions full of disgust and disbelief. Others seemed merely curious. A human, married to their queen. Unthinkable. But here he was. After what felt like an eternity, they entered a large chamber. The ceiling stretched high, supported by massive pillars that shimmered with golden energy. A long ceremonial table stood in the center, with a throne-like chair at the end. Zarelia took her seat, motioning for Daniel to stand beside her. He hesitated but obeyed. A group of high-ranking nobles stood on the other side, their expressions tense. One of them, a tall warrior with silver skin and sharp black markings, stepped forward. His glowing yellow eyes narrowed at Daniel. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice calm but firm. "What is the meaning of this?" Zarelia rested her hands on the arms of her throne, completely unfazed. "What do you mean, General Vorx?" The warrior's jaw tightened. "You have taken a human as your consort." He glanced at Daniel with clear disdain. "This is unprecedented." Daniel clenched his fists. He wasn't a fan of being talked about like he wasn't in the room, but he kept his mouth shut. For now. Zarelia's gaze sharpened. "Are you questioning my decision, General?" The air grew tense. Vorx lowered his head slightly. "I would never question you, my queen. But the council will not accept this easily. A human cannot stand beside you." Zarelia's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Then they will have to accept it." Murmurs spread among the nobles, but no one dared to argue further. Daniel took a deep breath. He had survived the battlefield, but now he was in another kind of war, a political one. The Queen's words had been final, but he could tell this wasn't over. The nobles weren't just going to accept him. They were waiting for him to fail. The binding ritual. After the meeting, Zarelia led Daniel to a private chamber. It was large and elegant, with a wide balcony overlooking the alien city. The stars above shone bright, casting a bluish glow over the landscape. Daniel turned to her. "So, what happens now?" Zarelia studied him carefully. "You accepted my offer. That means you must undergo the binding ritual." Daniel frowned. Binding ritual. The Queen walked to the center of the room, where a circular platform glowed beneath their feet. "Silari marriages are not just words," she explained. "A bond is formed between partners, one that connects them physically and mentally." Daniel's stomach twisted. Mentally. Before he could protest, Zarelia raised her hand, and the platform's symbols glowed brighter. A warm energy flowed around them, making his skin tingle. His heartbeat quickened. He felt something, Strange. A connection. It was as if a thread of energy had linked him to Zorelia, like a whisper in the back of his mind. He could sense her presence, not her thoughts, but something deeper. Zorelia's expression softened slightly. It is done. Daniel took a shaky breath. He didn't feel different, but he knew something had changed. Does this mean I can hear your thoughts? He asked hesitantly. The Queen let out a rare chuckle. No, the bond is not that intrusive, but you will sense when I am near, and when I am in danger. Daniel's brows furrowed. In danger. Zorelia's expression turned serious. There are those who will not accept you, Daniel. They will test you, challenge you, and seek to remove you. He swallowed. Great. Zorelia stepped closer. You wanted to live. Now you must prove that you deserve to. Daniel met her gaze. This was more than just survival now. If he wanted to make it out of this alive, he had to play their game. And he never backed down from a challenge. Daniel Carter had barely begun to adjust to the strange new reality of being Queen Zorelia's husband when the real challenge began. His survival had depended on accepting her offer, but now his survival depended on proving himself. The Queen's words echoed in his mind. You wanted to live. Now you must prove that you deserve to. Standing in the royal training arena, he now understood exactly what she had meant. The first test. A circle of Silari warriors surrounded Daniel, their glowing eyes full of doubt and amusement. Some looked at him like he was a joke, others like he was a mistake that needed to be corrected. General Vorek stood at the front, arms crossed, his gaze filled with barely concealed disdain. The Queen has chosen a human as her consort, Vorek announced, his voice carrying across the arena. And yet, we do not know if he is worthy. Daniel already knew where this was going. They wanted to test him. Zorelia sat on a raised platform, her posture calm and unreadable. She had not interfered or stopped the warriors from challenging him. This was expected. Daniel glanced up at her, and she nodded slightly. This was his fight. Vorek's lips curled. We will give him a fair chance, he said, though the amusement in his tone made it clear that he expected Daniel to fail. A warrior stepped forward, towering over Daniel. His dark exoskeletal armor gleamed under the alien sun, and razor-sharp claws flexed at his sides. You will fight, Vorek declared. Prove your strength, or leave in disgrace. Daniel exhaled, rolling his shoulders. His muscles still ached from his injuries, but he had been in worse situations before. The warrior charged. Daniel barely dodged the first swing. The alien was fast, too fast, moving with inhuman agility. Daniel ducked, barely avoiding a strike aimed at his head. Instinct took over. He moved differently than the Xilari, using his smaller frame and speed. Instead of meeting power with power, he sidestepped, letting the warrior's own force throw him off balance. With a quick motion, Daniel grabbed a fallen staff from the ground. The moment the warrior turned back toward him, Daniel struck, slamming the staff against the warrior's exposed side. The alien stumbled, caught off guard. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Vorek's smirk disappeared. The warrior growled, lunging again, this time faster and more aggressive. Daniel ducked and weaved, blocking some hits and absorbing others. Pain flared in his ribs, but he gritted his teeth and pushed forward. Then he saw his opening. Using momentum, he dodged one last attack, then spun the staff in his hands and swept the warrior's legs out from under him. The massive alien crashed onto the ground, and Daniel didn't hesitate. He pressed the staff against his opponent's throat, just hard enough to prove his point. Silence fell over the arena. Then the warrior laughed. A deep, rumbling sound. You fight well, human, he admitted, rising to his feet and bowing his head slightly, a rare sign of respect. Daniel took a deep breath, rolling his shoulders. He wasn't trying to prove that he was stronger than them. He was proving that he wasn't weak. The whispers of doubt in the crowd were shifting. Maybe the human wasn't so useless after all. The Queen's approval. Later that evening, Daniel stood on the balcony of the palace, looking over the alien city. His body ached, but he had survived. Sorelli approached him, her expression unreadable as always. "You handled yourself well today," she said, stepping beside him. Daniel let out a breath. "I survived. Barely." The queen tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You did more than survive. You earned the respect of warriors who thought you were nothing." Daniel leaned on the railing, exhaling. "Why did you let them do it?" Sorelli's gaze didn't waver. "Because if I had stopped them, they would have never accepted you." Daniel turned to look at her. "And do you accept me?" For the first time, the queen's expression softened, just slightly. "You are not like them," she admitted. "But perhaps that is not a weakness." Daniel smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment." She didn't reply, but something in her gaze told him that he had taken a small step forward. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Now it was about earning his place, and he wasn't about to back down. The palace halls were silent, but Daniel Carter had learned that silence never meant safety. It had been days since the trial in the arena, and while some warriors now looked at him with respect, others still glared with quiet hostility. He could feel it in their stares, in their whispers, in the way some guards tightened their grips on their weapons when he walked past. He had won a battle, but the war for acceptance was far from over. A warning in the shadows. Late one evening, Daniel stood on the balcony of his chamber, gazing out at the alien city that stretched beneath the twin moons. The wind carried the faint sounds of distant music and the hum of starships moving through the sky. He sighed, rubbing his sore arms. Training with the auxiliary warriors every day had left him bruised and exhausted, but he had no choice. He had to keep up. He had to be more than just a fragile human in their eyes. A soft noise made him turn. In the dim torchlight, a cloaked figure stood in the shadows of his chamber. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He reached for the dagger he had started carrying. He never went unarmed anymore. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low but firm. The figure stepped forward, and the light revealed an auxiliary woman with dark silver skin and piercing green eyes. She wasn't a warrior, but she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew secrets. "I came to warn you," she said in a hushed tone. Daniel didn't lower his weapon. "About what?" She glanced toward the doorway, as if checking to see if they were being overheard. Then she met his gaze. "Someone in the palace wants you dead." The assassin's strike. Daniel had expected something like this. The queen's decision to make him her consort had not gone unchallenged. He had seen the looks of anger and betrayal on the faces of the nobles, the generals, the council members who saw him as an outsider who did not belong. He had assumed they would try to humiliate him, push him into failing. But now, they were skipping past that. They wanted him gone. The mysterious woman, a palace informant loyal to the queen, had warned him that an attempt would be made that very night. So he waited. In the deep hours of the night, as the palace lay still, Daniel lay awake, his dagger hidden beneath his pillow. His heart pounded as he listened for anything unusual. Then he heard it. The faintest creak, the whisper of feet brushing against the floor. They were here. Daniel didn't wait for them to make the first move. He rolled off the bed just as a blade slashed through the air where his throat had been. The assassin, a tall auxiliary dressed in dark armor, cursed under his breath. But before he could attack again, Daniel grabbed the nearby lamp and smashed it against the assassin's head. The attacker staggered, but another one lunged from the shadows. Daniel barely dodged in time, feeling the rush of air as the second blade nearly sliced his side. Two of them. He needed to move, fast. He grabbed a chair and threw it at the second assassin, buying himself a moment. But the first one was already recovering. They weren't just random killers. They were trained, moving with deadly precision. They weren't here to scare him. They were here to finish the job. A fight for survival. Daniel knew he couldn't overpower them. The auxiliary were faster, stronger. He had to be smarter. He grabbed the decorative wall torch, yanking it from its stand, the flames flickering wildly. He swung it toward the assassins, forcing them to step back from the fire. The brief hesitation was all he needed. With a quick, decisive movement, Daniel threw the torch at the heavy drapes by the window, and the fabric immediately caught fire. Flames erupted, spreading rapidly. Smoke filled the room, and the assassins cursed, retreating from the unexpected blaze. That was his chance. Daniel charged toward the door, kicking it open. Guards rushed in at the commotion, their weapons raised, but the assassins were already fleeing, disappearing into the smoke before they could be caught. Coughing, Daniel stumbled into the hallway, gripping his side where one of the blades had barely grazed him. And then he saw her. Queen Zorelia. She stood at the end of the corridor, her violet eyes burning with fury. The guards knelt immediately, sensing the storm about to come. Daniel met her gaze, still catching his breath. "Told you," he managed to say. "Not everyone likes me around here." Zorelia's face was like carved stone, unreadable, except for the dark rage simmering beneath the surface. "Who did this?" she asked, her voice cold and dangerous. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow. "I don't know, but they weren't amateurs." The queen's jaw tightened. Then she turned to her guards. "Seal the palace. No one leaves until I find out who dares betray me." The beginning of a bigger war. By morning, the palace was on lockdown. Every warrior, every noble, every servant was being questioned. But Daniel knew one thing. This wasn't over. Whoever had sent those assassins wasn't going to give up so easily. If they had tried once, they would try again. He had survived the battlefield. He had survived the arena. But now he was in a deadlier war, one fought in shadows and whispers. And if he wanted to stay alive, he had to find his enemies before they found him. The palace was in lockdown. No one entered. No one left. Queen Zorelia's command had sent shockwaves through the royal court. The attack on Daniel was not just an attempted assassination. It was an act of defiance against the queen herself. The nobles whispered behind closed doors. The warriors remained tense, hands on their weapons. Someone within the palace had given the order to kill him. But who? A dangerous game begins. Daniel Carter paced in his chamber, his mind racing. Someone had tried to remove him, and they had almost succeeded. He couldn't afford to just wait for the next attack. If he wanted to survive, he had to think like a soldier. And in war, the best way to fight back was to strike first. The door opened, and Zorelia entered, her violet eyes sharp and unreadable. "You should be resting," she said, but there was no softness in her tone. Daniel smirked, crossing his arms. "Resting won't keep me alive." Zorelia studied him for a moment. "You're not afraid." "Oh, I'm afraid," Daniel admitted. "But fear doesn't solve problems. Strategy does." Her expression flickered, as if she hadn't expected that answer. "Then tell me, human," she said. "What is your strategy?" Daniel stepped closer. "Whoever ordered the attack is still inside this palace. They wouldn't risk an assassination unless they were sure they had support." Zorelia nodded. "Agreed. My investigators are searching for the traitor." Daniel shook his head. "No, that's not enough. They won't confess. And even if you find one, they'll just replace them with another." The queen frowned. "Then what do you suggest?" Daniel took a slow breath. Now came the risky part. "I want you to give them what they want." Zorelia's expression turned to stone. "You want me to let them kill you?" Daniel smirked. "Not exactly." Setting the trap. That night, rumors spread across the palace. The queen's human consort had been badly wounded in the attack. He was weak, barely able to stand, and unguarded in his chambers. Only a few guards stood watch outside his door. The queen was too distracted with the investigation to pay attention. It was the perfect opportunity. And that was exactly what Daniel wanted. He sat in the dimly lit room, his dagger hidden beneath the folds of his tunic. The window remained open, the curtains swaying in the night air. Then, just as he had expected, the assassins came. Two figures slipped through the shadows, moving like ghosts. Daniel stayed still, his breathing steady. The first assassin approached the bed, raising a thin, curved blade. He struck, only to find the bed empty. A sharp click echoed in the room. The doors slammed shut, and torches flared to life, revealing Zorelia and a dozen warriors waiting in the corners of the chamber. The assassins froze. Daniel stepped out from behind the door, smirking. "Looks like you fell for it." The queen's voice was like ice. "Surrender, and you may live to explain yourselves." One of the assassins lunged for Daniel, but he was ready. He dodged, grabbing the assassin's wrist and twisting the blade free. The auxiliary was stronger, but Daniel used his speed and human reflexes, slamming the attacker against the wall. The second assassin tried to escape, but Zorelia moved like lightning, her own blade slicing through the air. The assassin crashed to the ground, pinned under her strength. Within seconds, both were captured. The queen's warriors dragged them to their knees, weapons aimed at their backs. Daniel took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from his forehead. That was fun. Zorelia shot him a sharp look, but there was the barest hint of approval in her eyes. "You played a dangerous game," she said. Daniel shrugged. "And we won." She turned her gaze to the captured assassins. "Now let's find out who sent them." The hidden enemy. The interrogation took place in a cold, stone chamber deep within the palace. Zorelia stood tall, her violet gaze unforgiving. Daniel sat on a chair nearby, watching as the first assassin, his hands bound, glared at the floor, refusing to speak. The second, however, was more afraid. The queen's presence alone was enough to make him break. It was the High Counselor, the assassin finally confessed, voice trembling. He said the queen had lost her way, that bringing a human into the throne was a weakness. Daniel glanced at Zorelia, expecting her to react, but her face remained calm, unreadable. She already knew. Zorelia turned to one of her warriors. "Find the High Counselor. Bring him to me." The guards saluted and vanished into the corridors. The queen's eyes flickered toward Daniel. "Your instincts were correct." Daniel smirked. "You sound surprised." For the first time, Zorelia smiled, just slightly. "I am not," she admitted. "You think like a warrior, but you act like a leader." Daniel felt something shift between them. Respect, maybe even trust. As the guards dragged the assassins away, Zorelia stepped closer. "This war is far from over," she murmured. "But today, you have proven that you are more than just a survivor." Daniel met her gaze. "And what does that make me?" The queen tilted her head slightly. "Perhaps," she said softly, "it makes you worthy." Daniel exhaled, his smirk fading into something more serious, more determined. He had come to this planet as a lost soldier. Now he was something more. And he wasn't done fighting yet. The palace had never felt so tense. The High Counselor, once a trusted advisor, was now imprisoned, awaiting his fate. His betrayal had rocked the core of Zorelia's rule. The nobles, too, were on edge, watching every move, as if waiting for the queen to show weakness. Daniel could feel the shift in the air. Even the guards around the palace had become more watchful, more cautious. No one knew how the queen would handle the betrayal. But there was one thing Daniel was sure of. Zorelia was no stranger to power. The queen's decision. Zorelia stood at the head of a large, dimly lit chamber, the throne room where all of the kingdom's most important decisions were made. The walls were decorated with ancient auxiliary symbols that shimmered faintly in the light. She stood tall, her posture regal, her expression cold. Beside her, Daniel waited. He had grown used to being at her side, though there was still the occasional glance of judgment from the council members who had gathered for this moment. "What will you do?" one of the elders asked, his voice quivering with concern. His eyes never left Daniel, as if his presence was a threat to their kingdom. Zorelia glanced at Daniel, then turned her focus back to the council. "The High Counselor has betrayed me. I know that. But we will not show weakness in front of our enemies." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. The room felt colder, as if the tension in the air had taken on a life of its own. Zorelia lifted her chin slightly. "We have all faced betrayal before. It is how we respond that defines us." Her words rang out with certainty, and yet Daniel could sense there was more weighing on her than she was letting on. The queen's eyes flickered toward Daniel again. He met her gaze, understanding that this moment was not just about her kingdom, but about her decision to trust him. She didn't need to say it aloud for him to know what she was thinking. She had brought him here. She had chosen to bind herself to him. And now it was his turn to prove that he was worthy of that choice. A test of trust. The next day, Daniel found himself standing before the queen's chambers, preparing for the moment that had been building since the first day he had set foot on the alien planet. He had been through many challenges in his life, facing danger, betrayal, and survival. But this moment felt different. Zorelia had sent for him. When the doors opened, Zorelia was standing inside, wearing a simple black gown that still seemed to carry an air of royalty. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something more, something that made Daniel wonder if she was uncertain of her decision. "You came," she said softly, her voice not as commanding as it usually was. "I didn't think you'd leave me waiting," Daniel replied with a small smile. Zorelia motioned for him to sit beside her. "We need to talk." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. For the first time, she didn't seem like the confident, untouchable queen. She seemed human. "I've been thinking," she began, her gaze fixed on the floor, "about the decision I made." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Was she regretting it? Was this the moment she would take it all back? She looked up, meeting his gaze with a soft intensity. "The council doubts you, Daniel. They doubt your place beside me. They believe that a human cannot stand by my side as an equal. They believe it makes me weak." Daniel's voice was steady as he spoke. "Then why do they still follow you? If they think that, why do they not take action?" Zorelia's eyes hardened, a hint of that familiar regal fire returning. "Because they know that I am not weak. They know that even if they try to tear me down, I will always rise." Daniel stepped forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "But what about us? What about our bond?" Zorelia took a deep breath. "That is what I have been thinking about." She looked away, her face softening for a moment before returning her gaze to him. "I brought you into this world not just as a husband. I brought you here because I believed that together we could make this kingdom stronger." She paused, her expression changing to one of conflict. "But I do not know if you are ready for this kind of power. You are still human, and your humanity will always be a weakness in the eyes of my people." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. Was this the moment she was going to push him away? But then Zorelia reached out, touching his arm gently. "You are right," she said softly. "It is not your humanity that makes you weak. It is your heart, your courage, your ability to fight for what you believe in, even when the odds are against you, that makes you stronger than any of them." Her words washed over him, and for the first time, he saw a new kind of trust in her eyes. "You are my equal, Daniel," she continued, "and I choose to trust you." He exhaled, relief flooding his chest. "Then I'll prove you were right to do so." The path forward. As they walked out of the room together, Zorelia's words still lingered in the air. She had made her choice, and she had chosen him, not just as a husband, but as a partner. Daniel knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for something bigger, for the future of the kingdom, for their bond, and for their people. And together, they would face the challenges ahead. There was no turning back now. The air inside the grand hall was heavy with tension. The High Council had gathered again, this time in the presence of the Queen and her human consort, Daniel Carter. The time for questioning and whispering behind closed doors had passed. The decision had been made, and now it was time to face the consequences. Cerelia stood at the head of the table, her posture commanding the attention of every noble and general in the room. Beside her, Daniel stood tall, his hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't the weak human they had once expected. No, he had earned his place at her side, and now he would prove it. "We are gathered here today to decide the future of this kingdom," Zorelia began, her voice cold and clear, echoing through the stone walls. "The time of doubt has passed. The human you have so openly scorned is now my equal." The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. A few mumbled, and others shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the queen's bold declaration. Daniel could feel the eyes of the council on him, judging him, weighing him, trying to figure out if he truly belonged in the heart of their empire. "Do you really believe this human can rule beside you, Queen Zorelia?" one of the elders asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Can he understand our ways? Can he understand the weight of your crown?" Zorelia's eyes narrowed, but it was Daniel who spoke first. His voice was steady, strong, and unwavering. "I might not know your ways, but I know strength when I see it, and I know when something is worth fighting for." He turned to face the council. "I don't need to understand every tradition. What I understand is that no kingdom will survive without its people fighting together, not just against its enemies, but against its own doubts." The silence in the room stretched for a moment as the council considered his words. Zorelia looked at him, a faint hint of approval in her gaze. This was the moment Daniel had been waiting for. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a leader, and he had to prove that to them. One of the generals, his armor gleaming under the torchlight, spoke next, his voice hard as stone. "You want to show us your strength, human. Prove it to us." He turned toward the doorway, where two guards entered, dragging in an ancient weapon, a massive blade known only as the Tridal Sword, an artifact of great power and significance. It had been used in battles for centuries, a symbol of victory and worthiness. "If you are truly the queen's equal," the general continued, "you will lift this sword and wield it as a true ruler would. Only then will we accept your place at her side." The weapon was as long as Daniel was tall, its sharp edge glowing with a strange energy. It was said that no one but the most worthy could even touch it, let alone wield it. Daniel took a step forward, his heart beating heavily in his chest. He had faced near death countless times, but this was different. This was a challenge that wasn't about survival. It was about proving that he truly belonged. He reached for the sword, feeling its cold surface against his fingers. The room was silent as the energy of the sword hummed, almost alive with its power. He gripped the hilt tightly and lifted it. To his surprise, the sword didn't resist. It was heavy, yes, but it wasn't unbearable. The council watched in stunned silence, and even the general seemed to pause, his expression shifting from doubt to something like awe. Daniel stood tall, the blade held high above his head, feeling its weight not just physically, but as a symbol of the responsibility he had accepted. "I told you," Daniel said, his voice carrying across the room. "I might not be like you, but that doesn't mean I can't stand with you. I won't run from this." Zorelia's lips curled into a small, approving smile. She had always believed in Daniel's strength, in his ability to stand against the odds. Today, he had proved it. The room was still. The council members exchanged looks, clearly impressed by what they had just witnessed. After a few moments, one of the elders stood. "It seems we have misjudged you, Daniel Carter," he said, his voice softer now. "Perhaps we were wrong to doubt the queen's choice." Another noble, a woman with dark silver hair, nodded. "The kingdom needs strength, and it needs unity. If the queen believes in you, perhaps we should too." The general who had issued the challenge stood silently for a moment, his gaze fixed on Daniel. Finally, he nodded, a gesture of respect. "The sword has chosen. I will not stand in your way." Zorelia, standing at the head of the council, her eyes filled with quiet pride, looked at Daniel. "You have earned your place, Daniel. From this moment on, "You will be recognized as my equal," she said. The council erupted into murmurs of agreement, some clapping, some simply nodding. The challenge had been set, and Daniel had passed. He was no longer just the queen's human consort. He was part of her kingdom, her strength, her partner in ruling. Daniel lowered the sword, feeling its weight settle into him, not just physically, but as a reminder of all the challenges that lay ahead. He was no longer an outsider. He was a leader among the Xilari. As he stood beside Zorelia, he knew their future would be difficult. There would be more enemies to face, more battles to fight. But together, they would rule, united and stronger than ever before. And that was just the beginning.